Captain Zethkar had been patrolling the outer rim for 20 cycles, and nothing interesting had ever happened. His battlecruiser, the Pride of Vexthos, was one of the Federation's finest ships. Its plasma cannons could punch through a moon, and its shields could stop a supernova. Today felt like every other day in his boring career. Then the alarm started screaming. Captain. His communications officer, a young Thraxian with blue skin and 4 arms, turned from his console. Unknown vessel approaching from human space. It's moving fast. Zethkar's long ears twitched with irritation. Humans were always trying to sneak past the border. Their little ships carried illegal goods or tried to explore beyond their allowed territory. It was pathetic, really. They were like children playing with toys. Put it on screen, Zethkar ordered. The main viewer showed a ship that looked wrong. It wasn't the usual human design. Most human ships were ugly boxes with engines stuck on the back. This one was smooth and sleek, with curves that seemed to bend light around them. It was also much larger than any human ship should be. Identification? Zethkar asked. They're calling themselves the Dauntless, the communications officer replied. Registry shows it as a cargo vessel. Zethkar laughed. The ship on his screen was clearly a warship, not a cargo hauler. Either the humans were lying or they had no idea what they were flying. Open a channel, he commanded. The screen changed to show the bridge of the human ship. A woman sat in the captain's chair. She had dark skin, short black hair, and the strangest thing of all, she was smiling. Not the nervous smile of someone caught breaking the law. A confident smile like she knew a secret. This is Captain Sarah Chen of the Dauntless, she said. How can I help you today? Zethkar stood up to his full height. At 3 meters tall with gray skin and sharp teeth, he knew he looked intimidating to humans. This is Captain Zethkar of the Federation Patrol Fleet. You have violated territorial boundaries. Prepare to be boarded for inspection. The human woman's smile grew wider. I'm afraid that won't be possible, Captain. We're on an important mission. You will comply, Zethkar snarled, or I will disable your ship and take you by force. You're welcome to try, Captain Chen said pleasantly. Zethkar cut the transmission. These humans needed to learn their place. He turned to his weapons officer, a massive Chronari with 6 eyes. Target their engines. Minimal power. I want them helpless, not dead. Firing plasma cannons, the weapons officer reported. On the screen, brilliant red beams of energy shot from the Pride of Vexthos. Each beam carried enough power to melt through the strongest known armor. They should have crippled the human ship instantly. Instead, the beams simply disappeared. They hit the human ship and vanished like they had never existed at all. What happened? Zethkar demanded. Unknown, sir. His science officer said, all 4 of his green faces looking confused. The plasma discharge appears to have been absorbed or redirected. I've never seen anything like it. Fire again. Full power. This time, the Pride of Vexthos unleashed everything. Plasma cannons, particle beams, quantum torpedoes. The space around the human ship lit up like a small star. Any normal vessel would have been vaporized. The Dauntless sat in the middle of the firestorm, completely undamaged. Worse than undamaged. It looked like the weapons weren't even touching it. Captain Chen's voice came over the communication system. She wasn't even trying to contact them. She was just talking, like she was having a casual conversation. You know, Captain, your weapons are quite impressive by Federation standards. I'm sure they work wonderfully against normal ships. What are you? Zethkar whispered. The human ship began to move, not accelerating like a normal ship would. It just was somewhere else. One moment it was 1,000 kilometers away. The next it was right next to the Pride of Vexthos. None of his sensors had tracked the movement. We're human, Captain Chen said simply. We're just not the humans you think you know. Zethkar's crew was starting to panic. His engineer was shouting about impossible energy readings. His navigator insisted their position had changed, even though they hadn't moved. His weapons officer kept firing, but nothing worked. How? Zethkar asked. 3,000 years, Captain Chen said. 3,000 years of being told we're not allowed to leave our little corner of space. 3,000 years of being treated like children who might hurt themselves with adult toys. Did you really think we spent all that time sitting quietly? The Dauntless began to change. The smooth hull shifted and flowed like liquid metal. Sections that had looked like cargo holds opened to reveal weapon systems that belonged in no known database. Energy signatures spiked to levels that should have torn the ship apart. This is impossible, Zethkar's science officer whispered. These energy readings, they violate fundamental physics. Physics, Captain Chen said, and her smile had turned cold, is more flexible than you think. The human ship fired a single shot, not at the Pride of Vexthos, but past it. The beam traveled in a straight line for exactly 3 seconds, then turned 90 degrees and flew in a perfect circle before vanishing into subspace. That beam will arrive at the Galactic Federation High Council chambers in approximately 6 hours, Captain Chen announced. It carries a message. The message is simple: the humans are coming. Not to conquer, not to destroy, but to discuss our current arrangement. You're threatening the High Council? Zethkar asked. Threatening? No, we're making an appointment. There's a difference. The Dauntless began to fade, not cloaking like the Federation knew it, simply becoming less real, like it was deciding not to exist in this dimension anymore. Captain Zethkar, Sarah Chen said, and her voice seemed to come from everywhere at once. You might want to call your superiors. Tell them the children have grown up. Tell them we remember everything they made us forget. And tell them we're done pretending to be weak. The human ship vanished completely. Zethkar's sensors showed nothing. No energy trail, no warp signature, no indication that anything had ever been there except for the lingering wrongness in space itself. Sir, his communications officer said quietly. What do we report? Zethkar stared at the empty space where the impossible ship had been. In 3,000 years of Federation history, no one had ever made weapons that ignored the laws of physics. No one had ever built ships that could exist and not exist at the same time. No one except, apparently, the humans. Send a priority message to Federation Command, he said finally. Code black emergency protocols and tell them to wake up the ancient keepers. I think we're going to need to remember some things we tried very hard to forget. As the Pride of Vexthos turned toward home, none of the crew noticed the small changes in their ship. The way shadows fell at impossible angles. The way their instruments occasionally showed readings from places they had never been. The way their own reflections sometimes smiled back at them with human eyes. High Counselor Vexthul had ruled the Galactic Federation for 200 years. He had seen wars end, species evolve, and stars die. Nothing surprised him anymore. Until today. The emergency council session had been called at midnight, Federation Standard Time. Representatives from 47 species sat around the great circular chamber, their holographic images flickering with nervous energy. The humans, of course, weren't invited. They never were. Explain to me again, Vexthul said slowly. How a primitive human cargo ship defeated our most advanced battlecruiser. Captain Zethkar stood at the center of the chamber, looking small despite his impressive height. His report had been the same 3 times, and it still made no sense. The ship appeared to absorb our weapons fire, Zethkar repeated. Then it demonstrated technology that our science officers claim is impossible. It fired a beam that changed direction in space. It moved without accelerating. It changed the laws of physics around itself. The Thraxian science minister, her blue skin pale with worry, spoke up. We've analyzed the sensor data. The energy signatures don't match any known technology. The quantum reading suggests their ship was partially existing in at least 7 different dimensions. Impossible, snorted General Kratox, the Chronari war leader. Humans lack the genetic capability for dimensional manipulation. They can barely manage basic warp drive. But ancient Keeper Morden, oldest member of the council, was not speaking. The ethereal had been alive for 3,000 years, and his glowing form was dimmer than usual. Finally, he drifted forward. I must access the deep archives, he said, his voice like whispers in an empty cathedral. The deep archives have been sealed for millennia, Vexthul protested. The knowledge there was deemed too dangerous. More dangerous than humans with impossible weapons? Mordoun asked quietly. The council fell silent. The deep archives contained records from the early days of the Federation, back when they were still expanding, still learning what lived in the galaxy, back when mistakes were made. Very well, Vexthul decided. Access granted. As Mordoun drifted away to the archive chambers, the council tried to make sense of the impossible. But across the galaxy, other impossible things were happening. The human colony on Kepler 442b had gone dark 3 days ago. Official reports claimed a voluntary evacuation for infrastructure improvements. But Federation spy satellites showed massive construction projects in the asteroid belt. Ships moving in patterns that made no sense. On Earth itself, something was stirring. The planet that had been quiet for 3,000 years suddenly showed energy signatures that peaked far beyond what their technology should allow. Entire continents seemed to be running on power sources that didn't exist. Admiral Marcus Webb stood on the observation deck of Hidden Station Omega, watching the construction proceed. The station was built inside a hollow asteroid, invisible to Federation sensors. Around him, thousands of human ships moved in perfect formation, building something vast. "Sir," his aide, Commander Torres, approached with a data pad. "We're receiving reports from across human space. The awakening is proceeding ahead of schedule." Webb nodded. He was an old man now, scarred from the first contact wars when humanity had tried to resist Federation control. They had failed then, but they had learned. Oh, how they had learned. "How many remember?" he asked. 60% of the population has been awakened. The conditioning is breaking down faster than expected. The children who were born after the memory blocks are teaching the adults what they never forgot." Webb smiled grimly. The Federation thought they had been clever. Take a dangerous species and make them forget their dangerous nature. Suppress their technology, limit their expansion, convince them they were weak. It had worked for 3 millennia. But you can't suppress human nature forever. You can't make children forget how to dream. And you can't block memories that were written into their very DNA. "And the eschaton?" Webb asked. Torres's eyes lit up with something between excitement and terror. 97% complete, sir. The quantum forge is online, the reality anchors are stable. The impossibility drives are. They're singing, sir. Webb turned to look through the massive viewing port. In the distance, partially hidden by shaped force fields, something enormous was taking form. 20 kilometers long, its hull seemed to be made of crystallized space itself. Surfaces shifted between dimensions, showing glimpses of other realities. This was humanity's greatest creation. Not just a ship, but a manifestation of everything they really were, everything they had been forced to hide. "The Federation taught us to build practical things," Webb murmured. "Efficient engines, sensible weapons, logical defense systems. They never understood that humans don't do sensible. We do impossible." Back on the Federation capital world, ancient Keeper Mordun was discovering just how impossible humans could be. The deep archives were vast chambers filled with crystalline data storage units, each one containing the memories of species long extinct. He drifted through the maze until he found what he sought, the files marked with Terra's ancient designation. The first record made his energy form flicker with shock. Species classification, Homo sapiens terran. Danger level, Omega-class existential threat. Recommendation, immediate quarantine and suppression protocols. Warning, this species demonstrates anomalous relationship with fundamental reality. Their mathematics suggest impossible theorems. Their children play games that violate causality. Their dreams occasionally leak into real space. More records followed. Experiments showing humans who could make their imaginations real. Children who drew pictures that came to life. Artists whose sculptures existed in more dimensions than the universe was supposed to have. But the most frightening record was the last one, dated 3,000 years ago. The Terran exclusion protocol has been successfully implemented. The species has accepted the limitation of their expansion and the suppression of their anomalous capabilities. Recommend continued monitoring. Note: under no circumstances should Terrans discover the true reason for their containment. If they ever realize they were not protected from the galaxy, but rather the galaxy was protected from them, immediate evacuation of all Federation worlds may be necessary. Morden's glowing form grew brighter with fear. He accessed communication systems and sent an emergency message to the High Council. "Evacuate the core worlds," the message said. "Evacuate them now." But it was too late. Even as his warning traveled through subspace, The impossible beam that Captain Chen had fired was arriving at the Federation capital. It passed through shields like they weren't there. It ignored defense grids that could stop entire fleets. It simply appeared in the center of the High Council chamber. The beam didn't explode. It didn't destroy anything. It simply spoke. Sarah Chen's voice filled the chamber, calm and friendly. "Hello, High Council. This is Captain Chen of the Human Deep Fleet. We need to talk, not as subjects and rulers, not as lesser and greater species, but as equals. You have one standard day to consider our request for a full diplomatic meeting. We'll be sending coordinates for a neutral location." The beam faded, leaving behind a small gift. A holographic star map showing a solar system that didn't exist on any Federation chart. A system where space itself was folded into impossible shapes. High Counselor Vexthal stared at the map for a long time. Then he did something he had never done in 2 centuries of rule. He was afraid. The Federation Armada was the largest military force ever assembled. 12,000 ships from 47 different species. Their combined firepower capable of cracking planets and boiling stars. They had come to the coordinates the humans provided, ready for the greatest battle in galactic history. Instead, they found empty space and abandoned dreams. "Report," High Counselor Vexthal commanded from the bridge of the flagship Eternal Dominion. "Sir," his navigation officer replied, confusion clear in her voice. "We've arrived at the designated coordinates, but there's nothing here. No planets, no stations, no ships. Are you certain we're in the right location?" "Yes, sir. But the system is wrong. The star is burning too bright for its size. The asteroid belt is moving in patterns that violate orbital mechanics. And there are structures that our sensors insist don't exist." General Kratox, commanding the war fleet, leaned forward in his chair. "What do you mean, structures that don't exist?" "Sir, our instruments detect massive constructions throughout the system, but when we focus sensors directly on them, they register as empty space. It's like looking at shadows of buildings that cast no shadows. On the main viewer, space appeared normal, empty blackness dotted with stars and drifting rocks. But occasionally something would flicker at the edge of vision. A glimpse of curved metal. The suggestion of massive shapes moving in the dark. "Sir." The communications officer, a young Thraxian, turned from her console with wide eyes. "I'm receiving a transmission. Source unknown. Put it through." Sarah Chen's face appeared on the main screen, but something was different. She stood not on a ship's bridge, but in what appeared to be a vast cathedral made of space itself. Behind her, stars moved in slow patterns that spelled words in languages that had never been spoken. "Welcome to the impossible system," she said with that same confident smile. "I hope you brought enough ships. Where are you?" Vexthal demanded. "Everywhere and nowhere," Chen replied. "We built this place between the spaces where reality forgot to look. It took us 3,000 years, but we're patient when we need to be." As she spoke, the empty space around the Federation fleet began to change. Ships materialized from nothing, not decloaking but simply deciding to exist. First dozens, then hundreds, then thousands. Human vessels of designs that defied every principle of engineering. Some ships were built from crystallized time, their hulls showing glimpses of past and future. Others existed in multiple dimensions simultaneously, creating optical illusions that hurt to look at. A few appeared to be constructed from pure mathematics, their forms shifting between geometric impossibilities. But at the center of the fleet, something truly magnificent and terrifying emerged. The eschaton was less a ship than a small universe that had chosen to take the shape of a vessel. 20 kilometers of hull that seemed to be forged from the fabric of space-time itself. Energy cascaded across its surface in patterns that wrote and rewrote the laws of physics. Weapons ports opened into dimensions that had no names. "Behold," Captain Chen said, and now her image was joined by others. Admiral Webb, scarred and grim, Commander Torres, young and fierce, a dozen other human officers, all standing in that impossible cathedral, humanity's greatest creation. Not just a warship, but a manifestation of what we really are. General Kratox recovered from his shock first. "It doesn't matter how impressive your ships look. We outnumber you 12 to 1, do you?" Chen asked pleasantly. She gestured, and space around them filled with more human vessels, not appearing like the others had, but simply becoming visible, as if they had always been there and the Federation sensors had somehow missed them. Now the numbers were equal. 12,000 Federation ships faced 12,000 human vessels. But the human ships were wrong. They moved like living things. Their weapons tracked targets that didn't exist yet. Their formation patterns created geometric shapes that made veteran space officers feel dizzy just looking at them. How? Vexthul whispered. We learned. Admiral Webb's voice came across the communication channel. He had joined the transmission, standing beside Chen in that cathedral of stars. 3,000 years of being told we were weak. 3,000 years of being kept in the dark. Did you think we spent that time doing nothing? You lack the genetic capability, General Kratox began. We lack the genetic capability for what you understand, Webb interrupted. But we never tried to understand reality the way you do. We tried to make friends with it. We asked nicely if the laws of physics might bend a little, and sometimes when we asked really politely, they said yes. The eschaton moved forward, not accelerating but simply being closer than it had been a moment before. As it approached the Federation flagship, reality seemed to bend around it. The background stars shifted colors. Time itself seemed to flow differently. Your weapons, Chen said conversationally, work by applying known forces to achieve predictable results. Plasma follows the laws of thermodynamics. Particle beams obey quantum mechanics. Quite sensible. She gestured again, and weapon ports along the eschaton's hull began to glow with impossible light. Our weapons work by politely asking the universe to try something new. Sometimes we ask energy to flow backwards. Sometimes we suggest that cause and effect might want to switch places for a while. And sometimes, her smile grew wider, sometimes we ask reality itself to take a day off. To demonstrate, the eschaton fired a single shot past the Federation fleet. The beam traveled in a perfectly straight line for exactly 3 seconds, then folded itself into a small origami crane made of pure energy, and flew in lazy circles before disappearing into a dimension that mathematicians had proven couldn't exist. That was our polite shot, Webb added. We're still hoping you'll want to talk instead of fight. But General Kratox was a warrior, and warriors solved problems by destroying them. All ships open fire. Concentrate everything on that thing. The Federation Armada unleashed hell. 12,000 ships firing in perfect coordination. Plasma cannons that could melt asteroids. Particle beams that could cut through neutron stars. Quantum torpedoes that erased matter from existence. The assault lit up the system like a new sun. Energy readings spiked beyond measurement. The combined firepower could have sterilized 100 worlds. The eschaton sat in the middle of the firestorm completely untouched. Worse than untouched, it seemed to be enjoying the attention. The energy cascading across its hull grew brighter, more beautiful. The weapons fire didn't bounce off shields or get absorbed by armor. It simply joined the ship's own energy patterns, becoming part of its impossible light show. Thank you, Chen said politely. We needed a bit more power for the next demonstration. The human ship began to change. The hull flowed like liquid, reshaping itself. Weapon ports opened that led directly into other realities. Energy signatures spiked to levels that made Federation sensors shut down to prevent damage. This is impossible, Vexthul's science officer reported, her voice shaking. The energy they're channeling, it's more than the total output of our entire civilization. Impossible is our specialty, Admiral Webb said with grim satisfaction. The eschaton fired back. Not one shot, but thousands, each one a small violation of natural law. Some beams traveled backwards through time to hit their targets before being fired. Others split into fractal patterns that struck from multiple dimensions simultaneously. A few simply convinced Federation weapons that they were actually human weapons and should probably stop shooting at their friends. In minutes, it was over. The Federation Armada floated helpless in space. Not destroyed, that would have been merciful. Instead, their weapons had been turned into flowers. Their engines were running backwards, making them stationary. Their communication systems were broadcasting poetry in languages that wouldn't be invented for another 1,000 years. Now, Captain Chen said, settling back into her chair in that impossible cathedral, shall we discuss the future like civilized beings? Or would you prefer we demonstrate what our impolite weapons can do? High Counselor Vexthul stared at his fleet of flower-decorated warships and made a decision that would change the galaxy forever. Open diplomatic channels, he said quietly, unconditionally. The negotiation chamber materialized around them like a shared dream. Not built from metal and circuits, but woven from possibilities and good intentions. Representatives from both sides found themselves sitting at a table that existed in several dimensions at once, drinking tea that tasted like childhood memories. High Counselor Vexthul tried not to stare at the human delegation. Captain Chen sat across from him, no longer the impossible warrior from the battle, but looking remarkably ordinary. Admiral Webb looked tired, like an old soldier who had carried too much weight for too long. The other human officers seemed almost normal. Almost. Their shadows fell at angles that geometry said were impossible. Their reflections in the teacup sometimes showed different faces. And when they spoke, their words carried harmonics that resonated in dimensions most species couldn't perceive. Before we begin, Vexthul said carefully, I must know.
How long have you been?
Like this? Admiral Webb sipped his tea, which tasted like starlight and regret, before answering. We were always like this. Your people just made us forget for a while. Ancient Keeper Morden floated forward, his ethereal form dimmer than usual. He had spent the last few days in the deep archives, reading files that had been sealed since the Federation's founding. I have read the old records, he said, his whispered voice carrying across dimensions. I know what we did to your species. I know why. Tell them, Chen said gently. They deserve to understand. Morden's form flickered with ancient guilt. 4,000 years ago, during the Great Expansion, we encountered many strange species. Most fit into our understanding of evolution and technology. But then we found Earth. He gestured, and holographic images filled the air around them. Ancient scenes from humanity's past. Your children were playing games that violated causality. A girl in your city of Mumbai drew a picture of a flower that bloomed in 3 different realities. A boy in London asked his imaginary friend to help him with mathematics, and the friend, who existed only in his mind, solved equations that wouldn't be discovered for centuries. More images. Human artists whose sculptures existed in more dimensions than the universe was supposed to have. Musicians whose songs made listeners remember futures that hadn't happened yet. Writers whose stories became real in small, quiet ways. Your dreams leaked into physical space, Morden continued. Your imagination had weight and substance. Your mathematics suggested theorems that made our greatest scientists weep with terror and wonder. General Kratox, his warrior's pride still stinging from the battle, spoke up. So you decided to suppress us, to make us weak. Not weak, Vexthul corrected quietly. Safe. We told ourselves we were protecting the galaxy from you. But really, he paused, struggling with a truth that had been hidden for millennia. Really, we were protecting ourselves. Admiral Webb nodded slowly. You were afraid of us. Terrified, Morden admitted. Your species represented everything we didn't understand about the universe. You treated the fundamental laws of reality as suggestions, polite requests, things that could be negotiated with. Captain Chen leaned forward. And so you built a prison and convinced us it was protection. We convinced you that you were a young species that needed guidance, Vexthul said. We suppressed your anomalous abilities with genetic conditioning. We limited your expansion to a small corner of space. We made you believe that you were ordinary, that your strange capabilities were just myths and legends. The memory blocks, Commander Torres said, speaking for the first time. She was younger than the others, part of the generation that had never been fully conditioned. You tried to make us forget what we could do. It worked, Webb said, and there was no anger in his voice, just sadness. For 3,000 years it worked. We became model Federation citizens, quiet, obedient, properly impressed by your technology. But we never stopped dreaming, Chen added, and our dreams never stopped leaking. The chamber around them shifted subtly, the walls showing glimpses of human space over the centuries. Children playing games that bent reality in small ways, artists creating impossible works, scientists discovering principles that shouldn't exist. The conditioning could suppress our abilities, Webb continued, but it couldn't change our fundamental nature. Every generation, some humans were born with the old gifts intact. They became our dreamers, our architects of impossibility. They built ships in the spaces between spaces. They wrote equations that described mathematics from universes that existed only on Tuesdays. And they remembered, Torres said. Even when the rest of us forgot, they remembered what humanity really was. High Counselor Vexthul felt something he hadn't experienced in centuries, genuine fear. What do you want from us? Recognition, Chen said simply. An end to the lies. A place at the table as equals, not pets to be managed. And if we refuse. Admiral Webb's expression didn't change, but the tea in his cup suddenly tasted like the space between stars. Then you'll learn why your ancestors were so afraid of us in the first place. The negotiations continued for hours. Treaties were drafted, territorial boundaries redrawn, trade agreements negotiated. But underneath it all was a deeper truth that everyone in the room understood. The balance of power in the galaxy had shifted forever. As the formal session ended, Vexthul found himself alone with Captain Chen. The impossible chamber had faded, leaving them in something that looked almost like a normal meeting room. Almost. "There's something else, isn't there?" he asked. "Something you haven't told us." Chen nodded, her expression growing serious. "Our long-range sensors have detected something moving in the void between galaxies. Something vast and ancient and completely alien." She gestured, and holographic displays showed deep space surveys, impossible shapes moving through the darkness. Energy signatures that made no sense. Things that make the laws of physics their playthings, just like we do, Chen continued. But where we ask reality politely to bend, these entities simply break it. They've been devouring galaxies for eons, and they're headed this way. Vexthul felt his heart skip a beat. How long? Maybe a century. Maybe less. Traditional weapons won't work against them. Traditional defenses will be useless. But your impossible weapons... Chen smiled, but it wasn't the confident smile from the battle. It was the smile of someone facing an uncertain future. We might have a chance. We can fight things that don't follow rules because we never believed in rules very much anyway. But we can't do it alone. She stood, and for a moment, Vexthul saw her not as the terrifying human warrior who had defeated an entire armada, but as what she really was. A guardian. Standing between the galaxy and things that hungered in the dark. Your people spent 4,000 years keeping us contained, Chen said quietly. Perhaps it's time you learned why the real monsters fear us. Outside the station, human and Federation ships hung in space together. The flower decorations had faded from the Federation vessels, but something had changed. The humans' impossible technology was already spreading, teaching other species new ways to think about reality. The galaxy was about to become a much stranger place, and somewhere in the darkness between stars, ancient entities that had devoured 1,000 galaxies felt something they had never experienced before. Uncertainty. 6 months after the Treaty of Terra Nova was signed, the galaxy had become a much stranger place. Federation ships now carried human advisors who taught their crews how to think sideways about problems. Thraxian engineers learned to ask their engines politely to run more efficiently, and sometimes the engines said yes. Chronari warriors discovered that battles could be won by convincing the enemy's weapons that violence was impolite. But the real changes were deeper than technology. Captain Sarah Chen stood on the bridge of the Eschaton, watching the construction of New Haven Station. The massive orbital platform was being built by joint Federation human teams, and it defied every principle of architecture by existing in 7 dimensions simultaneously while somehow remaining completely comfortable to live in. Status report, she requested. Commander Torres, now her executive officer, looked up from her impossible console. Construction is ahead of schedule. The Thraxian engineers have taken to dimensional folding like fish to water. The Chronari work crews keep trying to intimidate. The quantum fluctuations into behaving, and it's actually working. Chen smiled. And our sensor network? Online and expanding. We now have early warning stations positioned between galactic arms. If anything comes calling from outside our galaxy, we'll know about it months in advance. The sensor network was humanity's gift to the galaxy, a web of detection stations that existed partially outside normal space, watching for threats that conventional sensors couldn't perceive. Each station was staffed by mixed crews learning to work with technology that treated physics as a starting suggestion, rather than an absolute rule. But today brought different news. Captain, the communications officer called out. Priority message from Deep Survey Station 7. They're reporting. Well, they're not sure what they're reporting. Put it through. The main screen showed Lieutenant Commander Vash, a ethereal whose glowing form was flickering with excitement. Behind him, the bridge of Survey Station 7 buzzed with activity as mixed species crews worked at consoles that occasionally showed readings from parallel universes. Captain Chen, Vash began. We've made contact with something extraordinary. It's not the entities we've been watching for. Well, you need to see this. The screen changed to show a view of deep space. At first, it appeared empty. Then, the sensors adjusted, revealing something that made Chen's breath catch: a ship, impossibly ancient, drifting between the stars. Its hull was scarred by eons of travel through the void, but it was still intact, still sending out a weak signal. We've identified it as a vessel from the precursor civilization, Vash continued, the species that existed before the current galactic cycle. But Captain, it's occupied. By whom? The last survivors of their people. They've been drifting in stasis for millions of years, fleeing the entities that destroyed their galaxy. They're refugees, Captain, just like we might become if we fail. Chen felt a chill that had nothing to do with the ship's climate control. Are they awake? We managed to establish communication. Their technology is different from ours, more like the Federation's approach, but incredibly advanced. They don't break physical laws like we do, they just understand them so completely they might as well be breaking them. What do they want? To warn us, and to ask for help. The screen changed again, showing an alien figure, tall, graceful, with silver skin and eyes like captured starlight. When it spoke, its voice carried the weight of eons. I am Elder Zendara of the precursor archive ship Last Hope, the being said. We have been fleeing the Devourers for 3 million years. We had given up hope of finding a galaxy that could resist them, but your impossible signals, your reality-bending transmissions, you give us something we thought was lost forever. Chen leaned forward. What can you tell us about these Devourers? They are entropy, given form, hunger given purpose. They do not conquer. They consume. They absorb the life force of entire civilizations, growing stronger with each galaxy they destroy. My people were masters of physics, controllers of energy, shapers of matter. We had technology that could rearrange solar systems and create new forms of life. The alien's expression grew heavy with ancient sorrow. None of it mattered. Conventional power cannot stop them, no matter how great. They feed on energy, absorb matter, turn strength against itself. But your species. Zendara's eyes brightened with something like wonder. Your species treats reality as a conversation partner. You don't try to control the universe, you try to befriend it. Chen nodded slowly. And friends sometimes do favors. Exactly. The Devourers cannot consume what they cannot understand. They cannot absorb technology that works by asking politely instead of commanding absolutely. They cannot feed on power that flows through friendship rather than force. The implications hit Chen like a quantum storm. You're saying we might actually have a chance. More than a chance, Elder Zendara said. In all our travels across millions of years and countless galaxies, we have never encountered a species like yours. You are the galaxy's immune system, the one force that can resist the infection of absolute entropy. Admiral Webb's voice came from behind Chen. She turned to see him approaching, his scarred face bearing an expression of grim determination. How long do we have? He asked. The advanced scouts are already at the galactic rim, Zendara replied. Perhaps 50 years before the main force arrives. But they are cautious now. They have sensed something here that troubles them, something they cannot classify or understand. Us, Chen said quietly. You. The next few hours were a whirlwind of activity. The precursor ship was brought to New Haven Station under heavy escort. Elder Zendara and her people were given quarters that existed in the comfortable intersection between normal space and the impossible architecture humans preferred. In the Lehir strategy chambers, an alliance unlike any in galactic history took shape. Federation admirals worked with human reality benders. Precursor scientists shared eons of knowledge with species who had just learned that physics was negotiable. High Counselor Vexthol, his own worldview shattered and rebuilt several times, over the past months found himself standing beside Admiral Webb as they watched the preparations. A year ago, Vexthol said, My greatest concern was managing trade disputes between member species. Webb nodded. A year ago, my people were pretending to be something we weren't, just to keep you comfortable. Do you think we can actually win this? Webb watched human engineers teaching Federation crews how to build weapons that fired hope instead of energy, defenses that worked by convincing attacks they were in the wrong neighborhood. Ask me 50 years from now, he said. But I'll tell you this, for the first time in millions of years, the things that eat galaxies are afraid of something. That's got to count for something. In the depths of space, the Eschaton and her sister ships patrolled the galaxy's edge. Their impossible hulls sang with harmonies that made reality itself pay attention. Their crews, human and alien working together, practiced tactics that would have been considered magic by their ancestors. And in the void between galaxies, ancient entities that had devoured civilizations since the universe was young felt something they had never experienced before. For the first time in their existence, the devourers encountered prey that might be more dangerous than they were. The galaxy had found its guardians at last. Beings who fought not with the laws of physics, but with friendship. Who defended not through force, but through the revolutionary idea that maybe, just maybe, the universe wanted to be saved. The war for reality itself was about to begin, and for the first time in cosmic history, the darkness wasn't certain it would win.